By 1968, rocksteady had run its course, and the beat of Jamaican music underwent another shift into what soon became known as reggae. Leslie Kong and Beverley's went from strength to strength in this period with a seemingly unending amount of hit songs, many registering on the UK pop charts as well, and by a growing roster of acts associated with the label. One of these had been an occasional presence at Beverley's for several years. Lead singer Frederick Toots Hibbert had actually auditioned very early after the founding of Beverley's, but had been turned down. He then went on to form a harmony trio called the Maytals with Jerry Matthias and Raleigh Gordon, had recorded for Studio One, Prince Buster, and most recently for Byron Lee. But he had been sentenced to prison following a roadside bust for marijuana possession. He insisted for decades afterward was not his, but had been planted, perhaps with malicious intent. Regardless, he was sentenced, served time in prison for several months over 1967, taking the Maytals out of commission in the fast-moving Jamaican music scene, the heyday of the rocksteady era. While he was in prison, the only producer that he knew who came to visit him was Leslie Kong. This meant a lot to Toots, and upon his release, he swiftly made his way over to Beverley's, began recording in earnest for the label, a series of sides that would serve as cornerstones of his career for decades to come. One of them, called Do the Reggae, recorded for Leslie Kong, spelt with a Y at the end in the early days, is widely considered to be one of, if not the first songs to mention the new style on record, but it would be another one commenting on his recent imprisonment that would blow the roof off with Toots's gospel and soul-fueled voice expressing his indignation at his unjust treatment. 5446, That's My Number, was a howl of protest over what he had recently gone through. That wasn't even really his prison number. He just made it up for the song. Would be a smash hit both in Jamaica and in the UK, and would lead to a series of further successes for the label, culminating in 1969's Sweet and Dandy LP, recorded for Leslie Kong for the first time, and forever after, the group's now credited as Toots and the Maytals, to emphasize Toots Hibbert's star quality. That appeared in Jamaica on the Beverley's label. It's a recent reissue through Trojan Records in the UK. This would include Monkey Man, which the liner notes suggest was directed at Leslie Kong's brother Lloyd, aka Fats. Hadn't heard that story before. Pressure Drop, thinly veiled warning to one of their previous producers that they felt had done them wrong. We Shall Overcome, a tribute to the recently slain Martin Luther King Jr. Sweet and Dandy, the title track itself, taking the prestigious title of Festival Song for 1969. The Maytals had won the very first Festival Song competition in 1966 with Bam Bam, done for Byron Lee, a previous producer. And this followed hot on the heels of Desmond Decker winning the year before with Intensified, aka Music Like Dirt, also produced by Leslie Kong. Two Festival Song winners in 2 consecutive years for Leslie Kong. Toots and the Maytals would win a couple of years later with Pomps and Pride. Debut album by Toots and the Maytals, not their first album overall, but the first credited to Toots and the Maytals, the name they would be known by ever afterward. Got a couple of Maytals singles here by Leslie Kong. Walk with Love on the UK Summit label, still credited to the Maytals there. These are circa 1970, I believe. And It Must Be True Love, Jamaican Press, the classic Beverley's logo there. Toots and the Maytals swiftly vaulting into the top ranks of reggae artists.
They say, son, give me your number now. He said, what's your number? I don't answer. He said, what's your number, man? I don't answer. He said, what's your number now? He said, what's your number now? I said, hey, 54, 46, that's my number. Oh, 54, 46, that's my number. One more time.
As well as having success in the UK charts with hits by Toots and the Maytals and Desmond Dekker in the early reggae years. Desmond's Israelites hitting #1 on the British charts, the first ever reggae song to do so in 1969. Leslie Kong would also enjoy crossover hits with a vocal group called The Pioneers, Sidney Crooks and Jackie Robinson. They had previously been recording for producer Joe Gibbs, but had fallen out with him over money disputes before moving over to Leslie Kong and Beverley's and starting another run of hits, including Samfi Man. One of their big songs recorded for Joe Gibbs had been commenting on the tale of a real-life racehorse by the name of Longshot. One day, news broke that the horse had died, and Leslie Kong came to the group and told them, "What are you doing? Longshot died. Make a song about it." The result, Longshot Kicked the Bucket, would be another smash hit for the Pioneers that would cross over into the UK charts, lead to 2 albums by the group produced by Leslie Kong, one titled Long Shot, another titled Battle of the Giants, neither of those in my collection, but Long Shot Kicked the Bucket would lead off Tighten Up Volume 2 in 1969, very first song on there, and Leslie Kong's UK releases now coming under the banner of the newly formed Trojan Records, crossing over to a white audience as never before. As well, the Beverley's ranks would be significantly bolstered by a number of artists who had recently been associated with a label called Lynx. Lynx was kind of a collective artist-run label that was conceived to give the artists more control over their music, bring the money back to them rather than sometimes unscrupulous producers. For more on the Lynx setup, you can check out the More Rocksteady compilation put out a couple of years ago by Rockashaka out of Japan. But these artists, once Lynx folded, many of them would move over to Leslie Kong. With his reputation for paying over and above the going rate, they would find him the next best alternative to trying to make it on their own. These would include the Gay Lads vocal group led by Harris B.B. Seaton. They had recently been recording for Sonia Pottinger, had lost their lead singer Delano Stewart. The group's lineup was in something of a state of flux, but by the time they made it over to Beverley's, they were still cutting a strong series of sides with some short-term members added to the group. These would result or be collected in the Fire and Rain LP for Beverley's. It's another recent reissue through Charlie Records in the UK. The original quite expensive. Reproduction Beverley's label. The Gay Lads, very soul-influenced group and powered in large part by the songwriting of B.B. Seaton, though the title track is a cover of the James Taylor song. Also includes a somewhat funky rendition of By the Time I Get to Phoenix, but the rest mainly B.B. Seaton originals, including the sprightly Secret Admirer and the socially conscious, soul-influenced Peace, Love, and Understanding, Someday I Will Be Free, Tell the Children the Truth, and There's a Fire. Strong album by the Gay Lads. Also got an old Jet Set, I believe, Culture Press CD from the 1990s, my original copy of that album. Another very soul-influenced singer who came from the Lynx group was Ken Booth. Didn't stay at Beverley's for a great deal of time, but long enough to record the sides that would form the Freedom Street album. Ken Booth, very gritty vocalist. Some of the songs written by B.B. Seaton of the Gay Lads. This is a Real Gone music reissue from a few years back. Very strong mix of covers and some originals by B.B. Seaton, recorded for Leslie Kong at Beverley's. Another group, the Melodians, would come from Lynx, would record several hits for Leslie Kong, including Sweet Sensation, and one day came to him with the idea to take some lyrics from the Book of Psalms in the Bible and put them over a reggae rhythm track. Leslie Kong, initially not fussy on the idea, but relented, allowed them to record the song, in large part derived from Psalm 137, I believe. The song was called Rivers of Babylon and was initially banned on the radio in Jamaica. Leslie Kong himself had to step in, go to the radio station, and intercede on the song's behalf. They had taken exception to the lyrics, "Oh, far I," in the song, somewhat pointed reference to Rastafarianism, very controversial still at that time, though otherwise strictly biblically derived song. Once the ban was lifted, the song became a smash hit, led to an LP called Rivers of Babylon by the Melodians, released by Beverley's in Jamaica. For some reason, was never picked up for release in the UK. Otherwise, it would probably be better known. But that song became a smash disco pop hit a few years later when it was adapted by Boney M. Through a convoluted series of circumstances, the Melodians apparently did not profit greatly from that cover version, though the Melodians' Brent Dow, at least, is credited as partial songwriter. And Brent Dow confirming that Leslie Kong was the fairest of the producers at the time, not only paying for recording fees, but also paying artists publishing royalties, not at all standard practice at that time. As well, the initial Beverley's signing, Jimmy Cliff, would return to the label after some years sojourning abroad. He would record a self-titled LP for Leslie Kong upon his return to the label circa 1969, would be reissued in the US a few years later by A&M under the name Wonderful World, Beautiful People. A&M Records there, North American copy, and would include signature songs like the gospel-derived Many Rivers to Cross and Vietnam, which Bob Dylan famously called the greatest protest song ever written. Leslie Kong would also issue some various artists compilation in the late 1960s. One was called King-Sized Reggae, I believe. Another one called Hot Shots of Reggae, again on the Dr. Bird label out of the UK, including many of those same artists, Ken Booth with Freedom Street, the Melodians with Sweet Sensation, the Maytals, Monkey Man, as well as Joe White, Delroy Wilson, Bruce Ruffin, and others. Various artists' compilations of recent hits from the Beverleys label. As the 1970s dawned, it seemed there was no stopping Leslie Kong and Beverley's with hit after hit flowing from the label.
There's a fire burning in my soul. There's a fire burning in my soul. There's a fire burning in my soul. Such a fire, and it never gets cold. Come on, let's get together and straighten this out. Let's get together and make this shout. Fire, 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 fire,
Spring of 1970, Leslie Kong also began working again with Bob Marley, this time with his group, the Wailers. You'll recall that Leslie had been the first producer to ever record a teenaged Robert Nesta Marley on his very first songs, including Judge Not and One Cup of Coffee in the early 1960s. Following that, Bob had gone on to form the Wailing Wailers, recorded a body of work at Studio One before leaving there to find better conditions. The group had been pared down to the core trio of Bob, sometimes his wife Rita as well, and his friends Peter McIntosh, known as Peter Tosh, and Neville Livingston, aka Bunny Wailer. They'd gone through a number of challenges in the intervening years. Bob had been away in the US for a time, working at a Chrysler manufacturing plant in Delaware. Bunny had been in jail for a period on ganja charges, and the group had been flailing about, trying to get ahead in music. They had founded their own label, Waylon Soul M, releasing a strong series of 7-inch singles privately, but struggling to keep the group financially afloat in the dog-eat-dog Kingston music business. They had no doubt taken note of Leslie Kong's many hits in the UK, internationally, as well as at home in Jamaica, and accordingly began working with him at the end of March 1970, with sessions continuing into April, again with the usual Beverley's All-Stars session band, with typically Hux Brown on guitar, Jackie Jackson on bass, Mickey Boo Richards on drums, and Winston Wright and Gladstone Anderson on organ and piano. The Wailers brought their finely honed harmonies, their songs, but otherwise left the musical arrangements to the players. The sessions were engineered by Carlton Lee and held at Dynamic Studio. There would be a strong showing for Peter Tosh on these songs, who would take lead on Stop That Train, the gospel Go Tell It on the Mountain, Can't You See, and Soon Come, which he would later revisit. The exuberant Soul Shakedown Party, with a lead by Bob himself, would surface as a single on Trojan Records in the UK in 1970, with Caution also appearing on the Beverley's label. That song reportedly written as a result of a brief run-in with the law following an incident where Bob had loaned his car to his Rastafarian spiritual advisor, Mortimer Plano, before getting into a bit of trouble over licensing issues. Leslie Kong ultimately would conceive of putting these songs out as an album called Best of the Wailers. This wasn't unprecedented, although it wasn't a greatest hits collection, but rather a collection of new recordings. He'd done similar things previously with other artists. There'd been a Best of Derek Morgan he'd put out earlier. Other producers did much the same thing. Well into the 1970s, Alvin Ranglin would put out Best of Gregory Isaacs. Wasn't a greatest hits collection, just a new album with the somewhat confusing title of Best of. Bunny Wailer took exception to this title, reasoning that best ofs were usually put out after an artist is dead, and the Wailers were living men with works yet to do, so how could this be the best of? Once again, the Catch a Fire biography of Bob Marley by Timothy White kind of goes out of its way to villainize Leslie Kong, calling him conniving and detailing a scene where Bunny confronts Leslie at the Beverley's record shop, urging him not to release this album, with Kong quailing before his wrath. Whether or not that scene ever happened, the legend grew up of this altercation, Bunny's objections to an album being put out as the Best of the Wailers. It did come out on Beverley's in Jamaica, Best of the Wailers, including Soul Shakedown Party, Stop That Train, The Joyful Soul Captives, and a strong influence of American soul and R&B, much as you'd heard earlier on the Beverley's albums from the Gay Lads and Ken Booth. Bob, in particular, having his eye on the American R&B market and absorbing the influences of the Black Power and civil rights movements in America. Best of the Wailers came out in summer of 1971. Some sources say August 1st. Ultimately, it would be a commercial failure, and the record-buying public was shocked when several days later, on August 9th, Leslie Kong suddenly and apparently without warning suffered a heart attack and unexpectedly passed away, with legends circulating ever afterward of Bunny Wailer's curse somehow leading to his death. Best of the Wailers, a commercial failure on release, was bootlegged many times over the years, different titles, different covers, even different track listings, did not quite live up to its title of The Best of the Wailers, though still a strong collection of material, with 4 of the songs from it making it onto Bob Marley's Songs of Freedom box set, and the album in slightly abridged form, as they did not have the full rights to every song, also appearing on Complete Wailers Volume 1 set from Jad Records, and in more recent years, the album in its original form has been reissued. There's a couple of competing reissues that came out in 2024. There's one from Culture Factory Records, which includes the wrong version of Soul Shakedown Party. It's an instrumental rather than the full vocal, probably derived from a earlier CD edition, which had the same error. This is a reissue through Jamwax Records out of France, I believe, limited to 500 copies, and with the correct vocal edition of Soul Shakedown Party included. Best of the Wailers, a bit of an oddity in the Wailers catalog and somewhat misunderstood. Leslie Kong's sudden death from a heart attack on August 9th, 1971 caught the reggae world by surprise. No apparent warning. He was only 38. Some sources say 37. Reggae's great hitmaker, suddenly no more. The legend would circulate for years to come of Bunny Wailer's supposed curse in some manner causing his demise, though a more pragmatic possibility may have been diet, lifestyle, perhaps a genetic factor. Kong was known as a heavy smoker, ate a lot of red meat, did not exercise often. His funeral was held August 15th, 1971, amidst heavy rain, was attended by hundreds from the music industry, including many prominent producers, artists, those he had worked directly with, including Jimmy Cliff, Desmond Decker, Toots and the Maytals, and others, even representatives from Trojan Records in the UK arrived to pay their respects. Leslie had been known as affable, easy to get along with, was seemingly well-liked by most that he had worked with. The Kong family would attempt to keep the Beverleys label going for a short time after his passing, between his surviving brothers, one of his sons, I believe, yet no one had quite the knack for music and the business of music that Leslie had, and Beverley's sadly soon folded, with the All-Stars session band, often consisting of Jackie Jackson on bass, Hux Brown on guitar, and the likes of Gladstone Anderson or Winston Wright on keys. Many of them transitioned into becoming the first incarnation of the actual Maytals band, as Toots and the Maytals became an international reggae act, in part on the strength of the hits they had had for Beverley's. Over the years to come, the Beverley's catalog would remain well regarded by fans and collectors. In 1980, Island Records would put out the Sweet Sensation compilation by the Melodians, collecting many of their hits for Leslie Kong. Mango label here, title track, Rivers of Babylon, and many others. The following year, 1981, they would issue the King Kong compilation, including many of the Beverley's hits from the early reggae years from 1968 to 1970. Leslie Kong himself right there. And that was on Mango again. By the time of the early 1990s, that Tougher Than Tough box set, titled after that big hit by Derek Morgan for Leslie Kong. The writers of the notes were calling for a multi-CD retrospective of Leslie Kong's productions. Did not happen at that time, but in more recent years, the Dr. Bird label in the UK has put out several CDs of, most of them double CDs, of Leslie Kong productions, including that Melodians one, Hot Shots of Reggae, Desmond Decker and the Aces, In a Rocking Mood, Beverley's various artists, Rocksteady Productions, Derek Morgan's Forward March. There are some others as well, not in my collection as yet. That has been my look at the great Leslie Kong and the Beverleys label. Hope you enjoyed, everyone. Cheers.